Hello everyone, it's nice to see you all here. We will be discussing localization into Ukrainian today, about certain peculiar aspects, about how it's run and how the quality assurance of the translation is conducted, what are the stages of it and what are the do's and don'ts of this process. I'm going to start by talking about myself a bit. I am a professional translator. I have translation education. I work in this area for 5 years now, 3 years as a localizer, and I work as a manager, as a head of the localization department in the linguistics center. And I was involved to a series of projects where I was playing the role of the editor and the quality assurance expert. Apart from that, I aid and train linguists for localization projects, especially those who haven't had a chance to work in this area before. And this part of work is what lies in the basis of my today's presentation. I'm going to discuss the skills of the localizers needed for this work, what's required for a person to pass a test for the localization process, and avoid wasting time on certain trainings that are proposed to us. So why localization? Why do clients order localization of their products? First and foremost, that is closely related to marketing. Most of the big companies want to expand past their local markets into international markets, and they care about their target audience understanding their content. If you only have an English version of the product, of your product, that means for a huge number of varied audiences, they would not be able to understand what are you offering. This is why you need to localize the product, because the main goal of the localization is selling. You have to, or we have to make the customer to buy our product. And this product has to be up to certain requirements of the target target audience. That includes a familiar format. If a client sees currency, date, time formats in the format that is suitable, that is actually very well known by the person, it's more likely that the person will engage with the product. Also, the bigger audience understands the content and sees familiar content, the higher are the sales. And it's a win-win situation, both for the company that sells this product and for the audience that receives the product that they want. Why localizing into Ukrainian has prospects? First of all, localization is conducted into those languages where the knowledge of English is not super high, so to say. As per the English Proficiency Index, determined by the Ukrainian company, we are at a rather low level. That means that localizing products into our language, it's profitable and it's necessary. Also, recently Ukraine passed a law according to which all the content has to be in Ukrainian. That also increases demand for Ukrainian translation of all the products that you might have. As demand rises for translation and localization, we encounter a certain series of problems that we have to overcome. First one being certain stylistic issues and aspects. The content has to resonate with the target audience. That would lead to higher sales. That would lead to engagement of the audience. There's a good example. I think it's a good example. In the mid-90s, a company entered the Ukrainian market. It's called Blue Water. It was literally water. So what they've done is they've localized their title, their name, and kept it in English. The TV ads had music in it, and they were saying blue water. What the audience was hearing is the word bluvota, which means vomit in Ukrainian. There's a huge number of people that heard that, and it seems that there's an opinion that this localized name was the issue, was the cause for the failure of this product in the Ukrainian market. The audience didn't accept it. Certain role is played by grammatical aspects. Since the Ukrainian language is the inflective language, that leads to a certain number of issues. First of all is gender endings and forms of address. If we're localizing into English, there are no gender endings, and the form of address is always just a name. In our case, we have to avoid, in the Ukrainian case, we have to avoid addressing the user as a male or female, because the client wants to capture a wider audience. Same is for the form of address. We want to address the audience informally. If we do that, we need to use "ты," which is the less formal form of "you." And that leads to gender-related endings. That's why we need to persuade clients to use the formal address "you" of "you" which is "вы." That will allow us to avoid gender endings and make our lives easier. Also, we have cases and variables. We receive a large number of files where we have variables replacing certain words, and we don't know what those variables are going to be used for, which words are going to be placed instead of them, and it's often not easy to rewrite this sentence in Ukrainian so that it looks crispy and nicely in the end product. In about 90% of cases, the variables are replaced by the nominative nouns, or for verbs that leads to infinitives, and that causes a huge number of issues during our work. Also, we have the pluralization issue. In Ukrainian, we have several variants or options of how to use use a numeral with a noun, and we need to rewrite the sentence in the way that this pluralization is not a problem, or we need separate sentences for certain ranges of numerals. Here's a couple of examples of how to write a sentence where we have a form of where we address the user and avoid a gender issue. Using the la ending in parentheses is acceptable. In the image below, we can see that this variable, it's an example of a variable being not very well used in the sentence. The is_SD card was a placeholder, and this placeholder was replaced with a noun in nominative, and it doesn't work grammatically in this sentence. In the screenshot on the right-hand side of the screen, I wanted to demonstrate how to use the pluralization correctly. The team did a good job, both on the engineering side and the translation side.
So, when we are done with the translation, that is not it yet. The majority of big companies aim to ensure the best quality for their products when they order a translation. That is why they also require that the translation be formed by the first team be proofread by another one. Why do we do that? To make sure that there are no errors in the final version, in the end product, because they could destroy that experience for the user. They could ruin it. On this slide, you can see a screenshot that is very much familiar to you, I believe. As you can see, there's a typo for the minutes. And then the number sign is not localized because we do not use that sign in Ukrainian to indicate number. The same goes for the categories. On the image on the right, the numeral also does not agree with the noun, which impacts our user experience. Here you can see that the word in the top line just did not fit into the slot, into this space, rather. And so if I didn't have this localization experience, I might have just failed to get it. What does it mean? Plus, there are there are other words below that have almost identical meaning, which also impacts the user experience. So, the LQA, language quality assessment or evaluation, as sometimes our clients call it. But regardless of the name, the meaning behind it is the same. Once the translation is ready, you send the file to the editor or for proofreading, for editing. So if there are any mistakes or errors in terms of meaning or otherwise, they fix it and they leave a comment. And then, depending on the system and on the client, the file is sent back to the translator to review the comments and then agree with them, saying, yes, I agree and accept all those fixes, or object to them and say that, no, I believe that this is this and that. And then this reviewed file is also sent to the editor, who goes over the comments made by the translator and makes the final decision. And this process, it might sometimes look as if it has overlaps, and it does. I mean, truth be told, when you send that file back and forth, so you usually try to simplify it somehow. Anyway, every company, in every company, they have their own scoring system and the threshold in percentage, depending on the company. So the basic types of mistakes or errors, different companies again might have different names for this, but usually it is something that has to do with the meaning, whether it was conveyed accurately. There could be some terminology issues, meaning whether the translation complies with the glossary and standards and such. Then there is the readability or fluency, as we sometimes refer to it, depending on whether it is easy to read the text as if it was written in the target language. And then finally the grammar, whether there's grammar compliance. So what are the worst types of mistakes that have the biggest impact on the user experience? First of all, that is the meaning, of course, because if the translator fails to accurately convey the meaning, that would lead to the user not understanding what is required of them, or getting it wrong, such as the sequence of elements that they have to, when they have to arrange the pieces in certain sequence, or just pressing something by error, they might delete everything from the app completely. Things like that. Then the readability. The better the text, the better it sounds, the better it reads, the easier it is for the user to use the app, which means better experience and more uses of the program. Then the readability, of course, it is something that is highly subjective, and it is very difficult to prove that your phrasing is better than the editor's. So if you object, you usually say, I believe this and that, and usually your objection is rejected. So then you have to search the corpus or take it to the higher level, to the team of editors, to just find some common grounds. Now, when do you object or appeal? You do that when you believe that your translation was correct, despite the editor's comment. It might be because they failed to see some part of the text, or they do not have as much context as you, hence the correction. And so you can and you should appeal in cases like that, or if you see that the editor has made a mistake. And you should point that out to make sure that the user gets the best product in the end. Because as a team, we have the same goal. We all want to make the best product possible. That is why you can and you should appeal, including when you believe that the correction was preferential, and when you believe that it is no better than your phrasing. So if it is something that is subjective. Now, how do we appeal? Always make sure that you are being polite, because we all want to be treated nicely. Make sure that your arguments are clear and well structured. It is great if you can include a reference to a rule or a guideline, some reputable source. Then make sure that you are concise, because the longer the comment, the more difficult it gets to the end to just understand what you meant. So you don't want to waste your time or someone else's. But then when you appeal, never give, never try to assess the work of the editor. Never appeal without the arguments. I mean, you don't just say, I believe my translation is better, because it will get you nowhere. You will only waste your time and the editors. So make sure to have some backup in terms of arguments, and never object to something you haven't been penalized for, because things like this take time, and sometimes you see that one of your sentences was corrected, and then the next one was as well, but the next one was preferential, even though you weren't penalized for that. So you don't want to appeal in this case, because it didn't impact your score or anything. It was just a preference. Now, it is very easy to become a localization god. You just need to know where to put things, how things work, and stick to the rules. Thank you so much. Any questions? Yeah, and work hard. That's true. Hello. I just wanted to say that safety and security, something that you referred to earlier as redundant. If you attempt to make that phrase shorter, the client might object because it would not agree with the criminal code, for example, and you don't want that in your app. Now, regarding readability, I'm not sure I got your point about why it is difficult to appeal. I mean, you can always say that this is the editor's point of view and this is mine. This is preferential, so I don't believe I should be sanctioned for that. But perhaps I'm just failing to grasp the concept of readability. Yeah, regarding safety and security and that redundancy, it is largely dependent upon the client. If they have very strict requirements or regulations that would mean or require you to eliminate things like that, that would be your job. But then, when it comes to some legalese, by the way, I don't think it's anywhere near the modal readability text, but you should not, of course, take anything out. But again, it's all up to the client. Now, regarding the appeal part, I believe that it is very difficult to object to those. I mean, you can say that it was preferential, but then the editor can always say that, no, this is the wrong word order, even though there is no fixed or strict word order in Ukrainian. But anyway, the editor could say that the emphasis is wrong, I mean, of the entire sentence. And that would be very difficult to appeal. Then again, if you find a similar sentence in a reputable source, then you can send the link to the editor, and they would usually accept. But if not, if it is something that is highly subjective, then it is up to the editor and all about their personality. Thank you, Olena. What about the collaboration between the editor and the translator? I mean, does the editor usually know who translated the text? And if the translator usually makes the same kind of mistakes, do they point it out, I mean the editor, to help the translator improve their job, but then the translator gets offended, and we have a conflict on our hands? Thank you. Well, it largely depends on the project. If it is something internal, inside our team, like at our center, for example, then usually they communicate, I mean the translator and the editor can send a quick feedback to the project manager, and the PM sends it to the translator. So they usually know who the translator is. I mean, we usually use some anonymous accounts to do that, but every translator has a number, for example, translator number 12, and the editor can see that the text was submitted by this translator. And they communicate. If it is something external, there is no communication usually, but there are reports, and then again, there are those digital codes for the editor to be able to at least identify if it is the same person. And then they usually, the editor, they put a mark in the system, they make a comment, and then it is up to the translator whether or not they aim to improve or if they choose to ignore it.